I feel it is necessary to preface this by saying, as of right now, I feel fine. The last episode I can remember was at most 2 weeks ago, or as soon as last night. But regardless, I feel totally fine. They get easier to manage the more I eat and practice my meditation, but some of them still prove to be overwhelming. Although my last one wasn't bad, the one before it had been particularly hard to move on from. Besides, the splitting headaches and vomiting that always ensues, that one felt more real than the others, somehow more close to home. I wish to God I could explain it better, but it's hard to remember the details sometimes. I'll try to be as coherent as I can, but I don't make any promises. Just know that nothing I tell you is a lie. I probably sound completely crazy to you at this point, and I'd understand if you've already come to that conclusion. So I figure the best I can do is tell my story and give you some context. My name is April, redacted, and for the last 6 months, I've been a part of a secret pharmaceutical drug test. To ensure my safety and yours, I'll exclude the name of the company in which I worked and change the names of the others involved. But I will say that this particular business was on the verge of revolutionizing the industry and changing the way we view the world forever. I don't mean to sound like I'm singing their praises, far from it really, but it would be misleading to say that they weren't onto something great. With the right people in charge and the proper precautions taken, we would have seen another scientific revolution unfold right before our eyes. I wish I could tell you that's what they did. I wish I could tell you that's how it went, but it wasn't. What I experienced down in the lab, what I'm writing to you about today, is not the future. It is the end. Have you ever wanted to relive a memory? Dr. Gale said. To have the chance to experience something all over again. How much would you give to have one last talk with a deceased parent or have one more date with that one that got away? The file he laid in front of me was thick and heavy, papers pouring out of it from all angles. What are you talking about, Peter? I asked, picking it up and leafing through it. Several months ago, me and a couple of the guys from R&D were talking about something that we thought would be useful for Alzheimer's patients, a way to tap into their brain and access memories. All hypothetical, of course. But the more I thought about it, the better the idea sounded. We had some free time set aside for new developments, and we used it to do some research and eventually animal testing. He grabbed the folder and flipped through a few pages, pointing out graphs and 3D models he'd printed up, quickly explaining the science of chemical compounds and their effects on the brain, most of which I didn't understand. The look in his eyes was all too familiar to me, a mix of passion and curiosity. To anyone else, it would have seemed like he was a madman, but anybody that knew Peter just saw it as the face of an eccentric. By the end of his mock presentation, I knew exactly what he was getting at. You mean you actually did it? I asked, astonished. He reached behind him and pulled a small blue pill out of his pocket, about the size of a Tic Tac. I did it, he said. It rested against the wooden tabletop, seeming to grow in significance the longer I looked at it. The letters MRX-28 printed on the top. How do you know it works? I asked. Preliminary tests show favorable scans from animal studies, but without something that can relay its reliability, we don't know for sure. I wouldn't ask unless it was important, but I really need your help on this. I turned up with a look of confusion. You know I can't approve human trials. You have to talk to Dennis about that. I know, he said, scooping up the pill and putting it back in his pocket. But you signed the checks. If you come with me and tell Dennis the cost is worth it, we can get this thing off the ground. I don't need to tell you how tight money has been around here lately. I just got the promotion, and I've spent the last 3 months trying to get the budget under control. You don't understand. This could be our next big break, he said. Please, April, I'm asking as a friend. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to weigh the options. We've been friends long before we ever started working together. I trust Peter's judgment when it came to stuff like this. But even so, I wasn't sure about sticking my neck out on something I still really don't understand. Call the meeting, but don't say I'm involved. Just invite me for financial advisement. Make this. I lifted the folder and set it back on the desk. More presentable. And if it looks like you've got your ducks in a row, I'll back your play. He grabbed the folder and thrust it under his arm. Thank you, I won't let you down, he yelled, his words fading as he ran out the door. He popped in and out of my office over the next couple days to keep me updated, frantically spitting out the date and the time of the meeting and assuring me I had nothing to worry about. When Friday finally came, I was sitting in the conference room with Dennis and our head of R&D, Dr. Pascal. We sat patiently while Peter got on the computer and got the projector set up. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, the bags under his eyes darker than when I'd last seen him. When he was finally ready, he took a deep breath, greeted us, and hit the lights. For the next hour, he walked us through every step of the pill's design. Although I only have economics and business degree, I was able to keep up fairly well. Basically, Peter had just discovered a connection of neurons that, when activated by a specific chemical compound, could open up the link between our memories and our conscious brain. The pill was designed to be taken while the user was asleep, and while they were asleep, they would get to re-experience any memory they wanted. I know the animal trials seem a little bit rushed when looking at the timeline, he explained, but we were able to meet the 6-month minimum, and we believe the results speak for... How do you get to pick? Dennis interrupted with a cold tone. Well, by focusing on the memory with your conscious mind as you fall asleep, the connection will bring that memory to the forefront of your sleep. So it's a dream? He asked. Very similar, but dreams are just a mix of people and events playing out through our subconscious. But the use of MRX-28 provides a highly concentrated recreation of an existing memory. You will be able to experience every sight, sound, touch, or taste that will happen during the event. And what about this? Dennis pointed at the papers in his hand. I see some abnormalities in the scans. Peter swallowed hard and flipped through his notes. These abnormalities were few and far between. We found that they had little to no effect on the animals during the long-term studies. We all sat looking at Dennis, his unusual stern demeanor doing nothing now to show his true feelings towards the product. He sighed heavily and leaned against the back of the chair, his receding hairline looking unkempt under the fluorescence. This company cannot take another loss, Dr. Gale, he said, sounding frustrated. Peter turned to me, hoping I'd come in and save the day. I could feel a creeping feeling inside me, an overwhelming sense of worry. The rush of the project made me feel uneasy, and I wondered if more testing wouldn't help. Delay the human trials for a bit and see if there were any problems down the road. April, what would it cost to get this on track? Dennis said, breaking my train of thought. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, the thoughts in my head being drowned out by Peter's desperate look. If we keep it limited, no more than a dozen participants, we could feasibly keep it within R&D's budget. Peter's eyes widened, and you could tell he was trying his best to hide a smile. Understand, Dr. Gale, Dennis said. I expect complete and timely updates for the testing. Peter was already busy gathering his notes and binders, frantically trying to get started. Yes, sir, I understand. You won't regret this. Before anyone could say anything else, he was gone. As he ran down the hall and back towards the lab, I could feel guilt begin to rise in my throat. I told myself it wasn't wise to start questioning the boss. But even then, it sounded too good to be true. Even then, I knew it wouldn't end how we'd hoped. The next week was spent preparing the lab for prolonged human occupation and making sure we had enough willing participants. The company allowed a small financial compensation for the people involved, and I went down to the lab on the day of the trials to get everyone's direct deposit information personally. The group was split between 6 men and 6 women, all with various age groups, weights, and heights between them. The lab had been repurposed to house the 12 individuals while they slept, containing 12 cots with monitoring equipment set up at each, along with several nurses and lab assistants wandering around and getting things ready. Peter had this glow about him I hadn't seen before, almost like the light around him seemed to make him shine, brighter than everyone else, the look on his face more eccentric than ever. He ran from bunk to bunk, checking equipment and writing down notes on his clipboard. After the papers were signed, I thanked everyone for their involvement and headed back down to the hall towards my office. Turning back, I could see everyone being debriefed by Peter about what to expect. The pit in my stomach seemed to deepen the further I walked, pulling at me to warn them of some unknown danger. But what did I have to fear? I told myself there was a reason I didn't work in the lab, as I pushed down that guilt and walked away. The first 2 weeks of trials went exceedingly well. Participants had discussed several instances of perfect relived memories, with only a few saying the pills hadn't worked. At the next meeting, Peter brought recording testimonies of the patients describing what they saw, so we could understand better how the pill worked. One participant, a younger man of about 20, told of reliving a day in college, re-experiencing the best high he'd ever had, saying that he could feel the warmth of his parents' basement every moment being just as good as he remembered. Another one, a woman around 35, told of the day her parents brought home her adopted sister. She relived the entire afternoon they spent setting up her room and becoming best friends forever. An older man even said he was able to relive the day he asked his wife to marry him, explained that he could feel the warmth from her breath as they kissed, and the smell of the roses he'd brought her that day. The pleased look on Dennis' face as he flipped through the reports caught me by surprise. With results like these, Peter continued, there's a good chance we should be able to get it approved and on the market before the end of next year. I could finally feel a sense of ease seep back into my chest, making me feel a little more at peace, only to be ripped out a few moments later. Although there is one glaring issue. Dennis looked up from the report with growing agitation. Issue? The pill puts you in autopilot, Peter explained. Great for reliving the experience, but you lose the sense of control. I could see the look beginning to grow in his eye. It was obvious curiosity had driven him to create the pill in the first place, but his tired eyes and increased arrogance proved that obsession had clearly taken over. But I think I might have the solution for that. He reached into his pocket like he had that day in my office, and pulled out a red pill of the same size, the letters MRX-29 printed on the top. I started doing modifications the second the human trials came back as successful. This will not only allow the users to relive the memories, but also control how they act during them. The compound allows the brain to build likely scenarios to the new stimuli and give the user an idea of how things would have played out if they had acted differently. Dennis reached out and took the pill in his hand, studying it closely. So, if I wanted to relive the day I took this job, I could instead turn it down and see how the rest of the day turned out. Exactly, Peter said, his eyes growing even wider, almost to an unnatural degree. Dennis continued to look at the pill, an unusually curious look on his face. This would require more testing, I said, trying to gain Peter's attention. With the positive outcome from the MRX-28 results, I don't see why we couldn't greenlight animal. How soon can we get this added to the human trials? Dennis asked. Dennis, I said, the pit in my stomach starting to grow. I don't think that... How soon? He interrupted. Immediately, Peter said. Hold on, I yelled, trying to keep my voice calm. We don't have any idea what this could do. Dennis turned to me, an angry look in his eyes. And you obviously don't know how much good this pill's release could do for the company. The results don't lie. The pill works. MRX-28 does... Sure, but this... Dennis brought his hand up to my face, turning back towards Peter. Why don't you meet me in my office in half an hour, and we can finish this up then? Peter grabbed his things, a distasteful grin on his face, and headed out the door. Dennis stood and slowly turned back to me. April, do you like your job? His question carried a cold harshness to it. Yes, sir. Then don't tell me how to do mine. Just make sure that we keep this budget under wraps. Is that understood? I knew I should have screamed, threatened to turn the whole company upside down and march straight over to the nearest police station, but I didn't. God forgive me, but I didn't. Instead, I stood up shakily, nodded my head, and left without another word. I tried to bury myself in work, as much as I could, but the knowledge of what I'd let happen kept invading my mind, overwhelming my thoughts. The rumors of strange things happening in the R&D lab didn't help my matters either. Things about people reacting violently to the new pill, that they were all having terrifying nightmares and hallucinations while on it. But when I asked the researchers involved for more information about it, none of them would give me a straight answer. They only said things like, it's inconclusive or it's not what we expected. I tried to get Dennis to go down there and find out for himself what was going on, but he only blew me off like he had that day during the meeting. My worry only increased more when I saw Peter in the hallway. His face was worn and strained, deep purple impressions resting under his eyes, the irises of which had been dulled under stress. I tried to catch up with him and ask him if everything was okay. Ask him what had caused him to change so much, but he always seemed to be in a hurry to get where he was going, never stopped to talk to me. After a week of the rumor mill growing more constant and the information becoming more macabre and unnerving, the pin finally was dropped. Complete lab shutdown, no one in, no one out. Dennis refused to call emergency services until the lab was under control. But I knew he was just trying to keep the bad press this would bring away from the company. Peter and the other scientists were stuck down there, with no communication and no help. I couldn't just keep sitting on my hands and looking the other way. I waited in my office until the majority of the staff left for the night. Making my way down the hall and to the doors of the lab, I saw that the handles on the other side seemed busted, like they were almost ripped off of the frame. A visqueen sheet hung behind the door, blocking my view through the windows. I stepped inside expecting to see the lab in some form of a light chaos, but what I found inside was the entire room uprooted from top to bottom. Papers laid everywhere, glass broken, littered on the floor, and the faint smell of mixed chemicals sat stagnant in the air. I could see the turned over beds covered in blood and knew something had gone horribly wrong. This was no lab accident. This was absolute carnage. So, come to see me fail, Peter said in a quiet tone. I turned quickly to see him sitting against the wall, bloodied lab coat and scalpel in his hand. Peter, what the hell happened in here? I asked shakily. He swayed his head from side to side like he was listening to a reggae song, before breathing in sharply and turning back to me. What didn't go wrong, April? I created a pill that could not only save this company, but also bring mankind to an untold science advancement. It should have been easy. He slowly rose to his feet, and I began to walk away. The MRX-28 was the perfect mixture. 92% success rate, with minimal to no side effects on the patients. He stopped and looked off to the side, but it came with one major flaw. He tightly gripped the blade in his hand. It wasn't enough. He turned back towards me. I wanted more. I needed control. I made the MRX-29 so that we could have that. He stared at me for a moment before beginning to step back. What happened? I asked. His eyes were on me, but completely lost in space, the light in them dim and continually dying out. They weren't supposed to be in there. Something pushed them out. He turned and pointed to the corner of the room, a bloody sheet covering the mass of bodies. I held my hands over my mouth to hold in my screams, the vomit starting to creep up my throat. They saw something. Someone. It was too much. He brought the scalpel to his face. They ripped out their throats while they slept. What was it? I asked. What did they see? I don't know, he said. They were dead before they could even tell me. He sighed and pulled out a red pill from his pocket. But I have to find out. Before I knew it, he was on top of me, his bony fingers sinking into my skin. I started screaming and kicking, trying like hell to get away. The light in his eyes had completely faded, leaving behind empty and dark husks in their stead. I felt a mask get pulled over my face, and the hissing of the tank beside me seemed to scream in my ears. I kicked and punched with all that I had, but it was no use. In a matter of moments, the lab became a fuzzy haze of shapes and colors, and before I could even feel the pill being shoved in my mouth, I was gone.